Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I'm your host, Thomas Paine. That name comes from, my last name is in the ass of the globalists. So it's Thomas Paine in the ass of the globalists, which some people get me confused with Thomas Paine at True Pundit. It's different. Plus, I have other names I use. And today, as you know, I'm Douglas Gabriel, and I get to interview again Michael McKibben. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Michael, we've been having some incredible conversations. Yesterday, some of our listeners and viewers have seen some of the 5 or 6 videos that we made on different topics. And then I believe we put out a video, not just audio. So there were 5 audios, 1 video, I think. But anyway, we've covered a lot of topics, and I just want to clarify what's going on here. When you said you'd come up and interview with us after we did those beautiful 6 videos on the plight of your company, which you were the CEO and founder of, Leader Technologies, the inventor of social networking, basically, the trade secrets that were involved and stolen from you, we keep harping on your case. We had no idea that we'd actually get to meet you someday and have a conversation with you. So it is such an honor. And what we found...
The feeling is mutual.
Oh, well, we are just doing our job as citizen journalists. And today, some of the conclave will meet and you'll get to meet and talk with some of them. And they have questions. But what I wanted to do right now, after framing what I just did with you in terms of what we've been doing, is I want to give some shout outs. We have amazing followers, and I'm not kidding. The people who subscribe to us and make remarks, all the people involved in playing what we call the glass bead game, they're contributors, they're editors, they're people who take the work that we find or that we create, our intelligence reports, and spread them all over the internet in many different forms. And we have people from every walk of life participating in the glass bead game all over the world. And now you've been sucked into it. So whether you like it or not, after today, I'm going to initiate you into the conclave. There are no Masonic aprons involved. There are no Illuminati rights or anything. It's just intelligent people using logic who are patriots, just like yourself, who are trying to stand up against the disinformation, the environment of falsehood, the fake news, the lying Washington, D.C. swamp, which you have been involved with for 17 years, fighting the very people who come up in all these cases, the usual suspects in all cases, Robert Mueller, James Comey, Rosenstein, John Podesta, what's his name? I don't like to say his name out loud. Chandler.
Jim Chandler.
James P. Chandler, probably one of the most evil people you'll never hear about. He's worse than Dick Cheney. But anyway, you've been literally face to face fighting this for 17 years. So when we get to talk to you, it's like jamming on the news, but connected to the past that brings it forward to reveal the light, to give the light to reveal who these dark trolls coming out of the swamp are. And when light shines on a troll, he turns into a stone.
Well, Thomas, can I interject here that I've seen some of the responses, and there are other people with other patents that have been stolen over the years. And what I would like to do is give a shout out to all of my fellow inventors who have been cheated. And forgive me for not bringing them all up. I'm aware more of some than others, and in some I'm aware in great detail. But the difficulty I think we all have as inventors when we start talking about patents and patent theft is because it's so technical, it easily causes the hearer to roll their eyes and want to change the subject. So what I have had is 17 years of focus on our case, but that's not to make light of the fact that we're trying to bring awareness of our case. It's not to make light of the fact that other people have similar claims and similar complaints against our government. And so what I hope everyone will do is rally around our cause and know that we do recognize that there are many people who have been cheated, and that we hope that as we bring out our case, it will cause attention to be brought to other cases, and so that we can see justice for a whole lot of patent holders who have been stolen from.
That's so beautiful that you did that, because that's the perfect response to this letter that I want to read. Now, what really blows my mind is we get lots and lots of these, and I don't look at them. Every once in a while, Betsy and her team tell me the questions, or they tell me things people say, but I try not to let, nice things go to my head, because then, my piss and vinegar approach wouldn't be very good if I actually fell in love with my own PR, right? Which happens in almost, all cases in the mainstream media, and then they become monsters and predators. Oh, yes, that's right.
Certainly in many cases.
16 in the last, few weeks are we looking at? And that's only the tip of the iceberg. Here's a letter to us, and I want to read this because this is so cool, and it addresses what you're talking about. And before we started this conversation, I showed you this letter, and we want to just give a shout out. Now, what's really amazing is I know this guy. I didn't see this before, and I didn't even look at the name. So I want to thank you, William. I'm not going to say your whole name, because what you're indicating here is that you're a genius. You're like a conclave member. And this is what we have. We have people participating in this. And it's through this awakening, this consciousness. You asked me last night, why do I keep saying what's more important than anything is consciousness? Consciousness changes everything. If the consciousness doesn't change, you can't reach the critical mass in consciousness to allow the deep state to be drained, the swamp to be drained, the deep state to end. So anyway, I want to read this from my buddy. I want to say hi. He says William here, but his name is Bill. Hi, Bill. Thank you. And if I'm mistaken, then you have the exact same name as a very close friend of mine who happens to be a genius too. So I don't know if this came from my friend or another person with this name. Hello, Betsy and Tom. Just a short but informative note. I'm thoroughly enjoying your YouTube videos with Michael McKibben. That's who I'm interviewing now. Thank you both, and Michael for his effort. It is indeed very enlightening. While I hold Michael McKibben in the highest esteem, I would like to suggest that you acknowledge at least two prior and highly significant government and industry thefts of proprietary software, i.e., number one, InSlaw/Promise, case management software stolen in the 1980s by the
Promise Software, yes.
by the Department of Justice and CIA and distributed worldwide. So you know that company.
I'm aware of it, yes.
Number two, CompuSonic's digital audio and video data compression technology and patents that established the basis for the MP3 and MPEG formats were stolen in the 1980s by the MPEG, I don't know if I say that right, working group, thus laying the foundation for everything from CDs to streaming. Mm-hmm. You probably know that group.
Well, that standard
everybody knows
what everyone
them.
uses.
Okay, I didn't know that was stolen. This is amazing. So we want to thank you, Bill, for bringing that to our attention. And then he says, I wish Michael McKibben success in his fight against the Borg.
I've used that analogy before.
And hope the foregoing references are helpful. Cheers, Bill. Now, I just want to read this because
I've been told many times resistance is futile.
I often use that as a principal and superintendent. I often tell people that right up front.
Yes, okay.
Resistance is futile. It's like a grand jury indictment. You're indicted the second that the grand jury is empaneled. There's nothing you can do about getting
really
out of that.
What they're really saying is you are a peon.
Exactly.
Resistance is futile.
Exactly. But your individuality will be absorbed into the collective. Mm-hmm. And I think we see that with social networks. We actually see this, and we're going to talk about the psyops of that when other conclave members get here. Particularly, I think John Barnwell will join in that conversation.
That's great.
But going back, because you know John at least on the phone, and now it's going to be great for you to meet him. Now, going back to this is an amazing thing. And what you said to begin with, I think, was a response to what you at least took a quick look at that letter that I just read.
Well, there are others that I'm in touch with, and so there's a lot of causes that are worthy.
And so, as we pointed out, and that's my whole point of this introduction, is we went over many of these questions. Thank you for the many, many, many questions that have come forward. These interviews with Michael McKibben have brought forth things we didn't know anything about. I know nothing about that, what I just read, and thank you, Bill, for bringing that to our attention, because I'm sure that individuals are suffering.
Well, I mean,
because of that.
When he's mentioned MP3 and MPEG-4, those are the software standards used in much of media today. So we're not talking about an insignificant invention. Yeah. If it has truly been stolen, that means the entire media world is operating on a lie as well.
And of course, this would be controlled by the patent laws written by James Chandler. Same patent laws, same patent maneuvers, same processes that steal patents from people.
Well, patents as a subject goes back to the founding of the U.S. Constitution. In the U.S. Constitution, or in the Constitution, there are two property rights that are protected. They're the only two property rights protected. It's for copyrights and patents for inventions. And so the very first patent was signed by George Washington. You can see it if you Google it. And so the idea, the founders knew the importance of protecting idea creators. They recognized that if we were going to have a healthy economy, we had to give some space for a lone inventor to be able to come up with a new idea that could be then introduced into the economy. And in the process, it would create jobs, it would create new markets, it would create income for families, it would create tax revenue for the government. They recognized the importance of patents. And so what they did is they said, this is so important, we're going to give that patent holder a 20-year monopoly on their idea so that they can make money from it and be rewarded. And that has happened since the beginning of our country. And so what has happened over the last hundreds of years is it has become the domain of lawyers. And as it became the domain of lawyers, it stopped being the domain of the inventor. And now lawyers have pretty much taken over the system.
The Declaration of Independence was written based upon the works of John Locke, who believed in life, liberty, and property. But in America, we changed that, and we changed it, the writers of the Declaration, including Benjamin Franklin, who did not agree with this, but the other writers said, remove the word property and put in pursuit of happiness. That is the problem in America. We're pursuing happiness. Not that we have it, not that we get it, and we don't get property. So we were taxed on our land. We were taxed on our income now. We're taxed on things. No, that's our property. You can't tax what someone owns year after year after year, then you never own it. In other words, we don't own property in America because we are after the pursuit of happiness. And, I'm decrying this because I believe that's one of the big problems with the Republic in 1871, basically taking over the states' rights and also then human rights and property rights and patent rights, as you point out.
Which is a property.
It is a property. And that's
property right. It's a grant given by the government, we the people, to an inventor to give them the opportunity to make money on their invention. So if the inventor does not have the cash to operate and to live while they're pursuing their patents, we don't have any new ideas. And when we don't have new ideas, economies falter, tax base goes down, and we become poor.
Oh, absolutely. And you lose the entrepreneurial spirit of invention, which actually drives not only commerce, it drives consciousness. It drives everything. And it's now being controlled by really a very, I use the word evil only occasionally and for certain people. And I do reserve the word evil for certain people like James Chandler, who have controlled the patent office and made it that they can even take away a patent. They can steal a patent from you, they can take it away, they can review it, take it away. They can do whatever they want with the inventions. And you yourself have been subject to this, and others I know who have patents, others who had their houses burnt down because they had industrial espionage go into their place that they were making these inventions, steal them through, and come out in the market immediately with them, burn their house down. People die over this. So we cannot. And we want to thank Bill and the others who made these remarks and wanted us to focus on patent trolls and all these things. So that's the reason this topic is coming up. Today we're going to kind of freewheel it and talk about the things that are filling in for
there isn't
the previous talks.
Patent troll is the opposite of what it sounds like. There aren't patent trolls out there. Idea people don't stand around thinking about how they can go sue some big company and make money. The patent troll concept was created by large corporations who tend to steal patents. I'm not saying they do always, but they tend to steal patents and then put the patent troll label on the very person who is the victim of their theft. That's what's happened with this term patent troll. And then Congress picks up on it, and a lot of those folks probably don't know that much about patenting as a subject. So patent troll sounds bad. I'm against it. So let's write a law decrying patent trolls. Well, the patent trolls, in fact, the very people that are stealing it. It's typical Alinsky flipping of a definition by 180 degrees.
And if you didn't hear Michael McKibben on patent trolls in their previous conversation, go back and grab that one, because it is amazing. And I don't want to get depressed about it, but I can say that I believe it's crumbling because these things are coming to the light. And person after person, right now there is an issue in the Supreme Court over the processes in the patent office that are completely awful for any new, young, small company. The big companies come in, they challenge that patent, say that it infringes upon one of their patents.
It's called a patent reexamination.
They get to look at the new patent, steal its ideas anyway. So no matter what happens, they get to steal the content and turn it into the big companies' patent office, which has many lawyers. All the big companies have many patent lawyers because that's where the big money is. Just as you say, they
$1,000 an hour.
They can. It's the biggest deal going on because one patent can, for instance, the patent that was, you never really got to the patent, but the trade secrets, the copyrights involved in leader technology,
right,
that was stolen by the IBM Eclipse Group. That is now essentially worth, in terms of marketable value that has already been produced by that invention, is what, 3 to 5 trillion?
Probably 3 to 5 trillion. Yes.
$3 to $5 trillion.
And that's a market cap number.
And what they would have done is, if it would have reached the patent office, they would have stolen it. But they had industrial espionage involved at the highest levels with the top guy involved in the patent field, involved in national security, involved in the Highlands Forum, involved in QTEL, DARPA. Steal it from you. Basically, point blank, you had to sit at the table with this man over and over, and he was your lawyer, and he sold it from you. So that's how deep it goes. If they really want something, oh, they will take it, because all they have to say is national security.
Right.
And then your rights for your property, your patent, they're out the window.
Some people have asked me how he got our source code. Well, he was our patent attorney. And patent attorneys often look at the source code when they're helping you write your patent. Well, he used that as the excuse to get a copy, a CD-ROM copy of our source code, which he was going to hold in custody as our attorney. And what we then discovered is 11 weeks later, all those ideas appeared in the Eclipse Foundation next release of their source code.
You know, Michael, I want to also give a shout out to one of our listeners who sent in a question. I'd love to answer his question, but it would go so far afield. Someday we will answer his questions about FEMA and Eric Holder and the CIA, and about fusion centers and all these kind of things. We have not directly addressed that. I'm sorry I don't get to answer that today, Martin. Thank you so much for your question. For Dan, your question about thorium, maybe we'll get to that in just a minute. For Meg, your question about Steve Jobs, perhaps we'll hit that. The questions about CERN and why it is that I say CERN is a fake. We already addressed patent trolls, and we addressed a bit about spyware and computers. We want to talk about all these questions to whatever degree Michael wants to address them. But I also want to thank a reader named John, and he wrote in a great question about Jeff Bezos, and he wanted to make sure that we understood that Jeff Bezos, as I call him, his granddaddy, was part of DARPA and the Atomic Energy Commission. Thank you. Yes, we pointed that out in one of the tapes, John. So if you look for that in the three previous that went up audio videos, what are they called? Radio podcasts, I guess you'd call them.
Isn't that interesting how these elitists are passing down this corruption to their children and grandchildren?
Oh, look at Jeff Bezos and just the way that he was placed in all those jobs.
Right.
When you're
No, he's a genius.
Oh, I forgot he's a
he
genius.
knows how to do everything ahead of time.
Sometimes I forget. I use logic instead of sentiment that comes through on the subliminal programming that is in all mainstream media. And then a big topic that I'd love to address is paper ballots. You know, I mean, both you and I were like, oh yeah, let's get paper ballots now, because you know, with your experience, how easy it was. You know about the white hat intervention in the Trump election, or else Trump probably wouldn't be president. So let me back up and say, John, thank you. We dwelt on Jeff Bezos's cardboard cutout nature and the fact that he is fake and what those centralized gigantic tech monopolies are all about. They were all driven from the White House. They were all driven from Silicon Valley, which was driven by IBM Eclipse Group, which were able to make tens of, I would say, I mean, if you add it up, let's add up the income from Google Gmail, YouTube, Instagram, Palantir. Did I say it right?
Palantir, yes.
Palantir. I mentioned Instagram, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and there's 6 or 7 others. If you added all that up,
Wikis, blogs.
what would you have? You would have probably the value of those companies is probably the value of all the rest of the stock market.
Well, you can see, I mean, the market cap for those companies is public information. And so that's the 3 to 5 trillion.
And that's just for all those companies, or for just Facebook?
Oh, no, for all those companies.
Okay, so, and then over years, we're talking over the years that they did this.
That's the difficult part, because that's just the current market cap. So
yes. So since about 2004, is it 2005? Is when
2004 is when the feeding frenzy launched all of these companies.
And so these young bucks who drop out of Harvard or actually don't have a degree, or their daddies and mommies got them the job, like Bill Gates. Bill Gates, I don't even think he can write code. He did not write MS-DOS. His partner wrote it, and his mother got him the job. So when you want to break it all down, you see that behind these mega billionaires, you have nothing but a very small group of people, which are a tech cartel that started working with IBM back in 1993 when they needed to send computers out of the country and needed to make sure they had a backdoor in them. So there's been a backdoor in all of it. We went over that with the whole history of ARPANET through DARPA, ARPANET, Internet. It's all the same thing. It's all AT&T, Verizon, Sprint. Who is that? Over 50% of that is your taxpayer dollars. But these corporations take in all this money, right? So when we look at this and we look at patent issues, especially in relationship to your experience, it may be the most lucrative business out there in the underworld, deep state, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
that there is.
It makes sense, because the financial markets are all about leverage. And so you can't lever something that doesn't have explosive value. And so what intellectual property does when you steal it is it gives you a leap to the next level of an idea. And I mean, anybody that's worked in a large company knows that getting any kind of new idea through those bureaucracies is near impossible. And so it makes sense that the patent office became the toy box for the large companies, because otherwise they would not be able to have these leaps in innovation in technology without stealing them from somebody. And so what better way, when I look back at my experience, first of all, if I'd have known what I know now, I would have never even bothered to bring out this idea to the market. And I think most inventors would probably say the same thing. And if that happens across the board, then the innovation in our country dries up. So these guys have sort of an inbuilt incentive to fool inventors into thinking that the patent office is going to protect them. But when in fact, as soon as you document your invention to the patent examiners, all of that, as we can see now, just gets shuffled out the back door to these large companies, who then exploit it before the inventor even has the ink dry on their drawings.
And the insider corporation then becomes
Then they're the innovation.
the largest companies in the world.
They're the innovation. They then put their PR companies and their lawyers on creating a story about how this happened inside their big R&D shops. And that's the idea that's pushed out in the market. They make movies about it. They write books about it. They create this aura around a false idea. I'm not saying they're all false, but in our case, it was false. And then they're off to the races. And so the average public is not familiar with patents, so it's all very esoteric to them. So they have no reason to doubt what the public impression is of that idea. And then once the patent holder finally realizes they got ripped off and starts to talk about it, guess what? Nobody believes them.
Well, the narrative, they got out in front of the narrative and they spun it their direction. And they actually, I would like to spend a whole talk about how they can manipulate your mind even through your phone when it's turned off next to your bed.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
They can implant thoughts in your brain. At all times, your phone is broadcasting. It's not just sitting there. It's broadcasting to you, whether you know it or not. And actually, it's marketed you. It has put you in your what did you call it? Your black profile or your dark profile, which
right.
we're going to talk about next. But in terms of patents, you see, that phone, who invented that phone? Apple, that iPhone. Is Steve Jobs a cardboard cutout? Well, let's just talk about that. And thank you, Meg, for asking us that question and also tying it into the question of, is CERN real? Because, you see Apple rises to the top. Nothing seems to stop it. They're always at the edge of innovation. Nothing seems to leak out. Nobody gets their technology. Their machines are all sealed, so you can't actually add stuff from Mac Classic 2 on, which led the market, and Microsoft just dragged behind it. MS-DOS was impossible to use. So Bill Gates, to say that he deserves it, no, he simply copied Apple, okay? Apple Macintosh, the Mac Classic 2, to this day is still the basis of all pull-down windows, pull-down choices, which are basically your on-screen, what do you call it? Your manual.
User interface.
It's
graphical user interface.
Yeah, it's a graphical user interface, which is your manual online. And that was his intent. If you go back to Steve Jobs, you actually hear some brilliant things. But remember, Steve Jobs did not do the work. He had the idea. He forced all of them. He was a monster. He set up impossible due dates, deadlines, which nobody could meet, but they did because he was a monster. And no one pushed harder than him, but it was because he had the following idea. And I speak directly from the fact that my boss for 11 years worked with Steve Jobs and was one of the 3 people who made the money off inventing pull-down screens and other elements of the Mac Classic 2 and Mac Classic 1, which were the basis of the industry for a long time. So I know him, and he had, the entire time I worked with this person, 11 years, he got all of Steve Jobs' new future inventions, from glasses you can wear that have a screen that you're online to everything. I saw it first because my boss was field testing it, because he's one of the geniuses, utter geniuses of our time, like you. So I worked with him. I can't say his name, but anyway, the point is that Steve Jobs was innovation. And so the person who's asking this, Meg, thank you for asking this. How come in all that we've talked about, we've never mentioned Steve Jobs? Because I don't know. I know Wozniak did all the programming, and he was tortured by Steve Jobs. We know that Steve Jobs kept everything proprietary, and you couldn't get in his machines, and you couldn't mess with him, and no one ever got to his secret coding. Microsoft is a, what do they call it, 4-bit coding, and Apple Macintosh was 8-bit, I think you said, or something like that. Maybe you can explain that. But my point is,
That's changed over time.
It's changed over time. What 64-bit configuration is the way we used to make reference to it when in the earliest days of looking at the marvel of Apple Macintosh creations and the iPhone and everything else since, which really has been the cutting edge. Why didn't they steal Steve Jobs' patents? Is he a cardboard cutout? And, how come he seems to be an oddity into the actual innovation?
Question for you. I've always had the impression that Steve Jobs was the chief designer of their product. Was he the chief designer, or is there another person there?
Designer, but he didn't write the code.
Okay.
He told him what to do.
Okay, that's fine. But there's a lot of elements to developing any of these products. And what I've always been impressed by with Apple is the level of their product design. It's just much superior to anything that's been out there on the market.
Hands down.
And I've always had the impression that Jobs was a bit irascible, but he got what he wanted in design. The other thing it is well known is that because he kept control of the hardware and the software, the security in the Apple world was always much higher. And so the one interesting thing about Jobs, and I don't know the details, so you obviously know more than I do about this, but I noticed in the Snowden leaks, Snowden has one NSA slide that shows when each of the key information service providers and key software companies started cooperating with the NSA in the illegal mass surveillance of Americans. And I noticed that Apple was about the last one to sign on. And in correlating the date, it was a year after Steve Jobs died.
Bingo. Bada bing. There you have it.
So was he resisting the NSA?
Obviously.
Interesting.
But the systems that he had to work with didn't resist the NSA. So all the systems that these things were on couldn't resist. AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, they all are direct 100% surveillance of all Americans at all time. And did Steve Jobs resist? I think that's the key factor. That's the reason he kept his machines so you couldn't open them. And everything was kept close to his chest. And all the other ones have all opened their door to the NSA backdoors. Their kill switches, their control, their microprocessors that have processors inside, and all the other surveillance and psyops and the hundreds of patents that have been created to control anyone who gets near one of their devices.
Well, since then, Apple has signed on to the NIST encryption key registry. So they now give backdoors, but that's I think that was after 2014.
Well, you see what I'm talking about. Michael McKibben will tell you he doesn't know anything about it, and then he'll tell you
well, I don't know the history.
The exact most important thing about it.
I will say that I owned one of the very first Apple IIs that was shipped into England back in the late 70s.
The Mac Classic
Apple
was in
II
the background
was
for most innovation in our modern world. It was the computer that innovation was done on. I had one early on.
Interesting.
And I loved it because it went further than anyone. They used to say, what was it? There was a date. The Mac Classic 81. Oh, no. Microsoft, Microsoft 2000 is Mac Classic 85 or something. No. All they did is copy from that point on. And remember, I'm not kidding when I say Bill Gates' mommy got him the job. Her dad owned a bank, and on the bank, she sat on many boards. She sat on IBM's board. And when IBM said they needed to find the best programmer in the world to write MS-DOS because it was a mess, she said, "Oh, don't worry, my son can. He's the greatest programmer in the world." She was talking about his friend. I forget his name. But he didn't do any of the writing. So his mommy got him the job. And remember, his daddy was the lawyer that supported Singer and Planned Parenthood. He's the number one eugenist in America. And now we know that the Gates Foundation, being led by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is actually being led by his daddy, who is putting poisons in the vaccines in Africa, and thrilled that they're able to kill, in their projections, 17% of Africa with their new program called GREEN, which brought Monsanto, GMOs, poisons, Roundup, and also vaccines that were laced with sterilization as well as forms of death. This is well known. Nothing's being done. So these big companies, big tech lords, produce all this money. Then they try to look like they're philanthropists. They're not philanthropists at all. They've already shifted all their real money into assets not under their name, and they use philanthropy as a way to get in every door. When you're giving away money, they let you in. And that's what the Clinton Foundation does. They say they give away money. No, they don't. They collect a tax for their connectedness and using their brand of the Clinton Foundation. So this is standard operating procedure, and we see it everywhere. And now the big techs, they gave $2 billion to Obama for his library. As you pointed out, the United States Digital Service was basically a war room, a cyber war room bunker, led by the Obama Chicago mob in Washington, D.C., in the White House, in a war against Trump.
So why do you think the U.S. Digital Service, which the White House announced with great fanfare, didn't get any press?
Because it was boring geek stuff. It was, we are going to digitize all systems coming into the federal government so that we can modernize, we can speed things up, and we can have connectivity. Okay, are you asleep yet? But if you said, Valerie Jarrett is using her Chicago mob Mayor Daley's family, which is basically, what is that? That's a dynasty in Chicago. We've had a dynasty of the mob in Chicago. And who was second in charge when the mob was being found and they killed the top dogs? Hugh Rodham. That would be Hillary Clinton.
So what you're saying
Rodham
is the
dad.
phrase enhanced user experience, somebody has studied that and knows that puts a hearer to sleep.
Yes.
That we're doing this to enhance user. Every excuse to violate people's privacy and steal their property has been done in the name of enhancing the user experience. And don't you hear the strings in the background?
And I want to underscore and explain to people what you're talking about. You have said this from the beginning. They are collecting information on every American to put a dark profile in place so they can control you, because they now have, through social media, through Google, through YouTube, through all these devices, through every Samsung, every Sony TV, every device, every electronic device, including, and they made fun of Kellyanne Conway, who said that even your microwave can listen to you. It can.
Right.
If it's on the Internet of Things, and you harp about this all the time, the Internet of Things is giving away all of our freedom. Well, now we'll go there in just a second, but let's go back to this war room and point out that what they were really doing is that was the next step to collect all information. And the last information they didn't collect from the U.S. Digital Service, which was all your voter collection, all your voter information, all your state registration information.
All your demographic profiles.
And then the only thing they did not have left, they had collected in some hacks that they say were, first North Korean, then Chinese, then Russian, whatever. It's all the three they always attribute. It's always a lie. They went into the largest database of workers for the government and stole all their data. And then they went into recently a supposed hack. Couldn't happen, didn't happen. And the people who investigated it, FireEye, they're fake, by the way. We gave a long discourse on why that was all fake. Equifax was not a fake. It was a breach. They gave all that information to the U.S. Digital Service. Why? They had to gather up all that information because after the election, they saw that they lost. Hillary wasn't coming to the White House. What they had set up, which was the digital control of all Americans, which was Eric Schmidt's plan, which we're going to go to into our next conversation here. We're going to talk about Eric Schmidt's alphabet box that he's creating for you. But what was planned was that Hillary would have digital control of all Americans.
Can I stop you a second on this dark profiles approach? This term first came out in a book that Mark Zuckerberg's former speechwriter wrote called The Boy Kings, and her name is Catherine Loss, and she, as far as I know, was the first to reveal that Facebook was actually creating what are called dark profiles. So in other words, even if you're not a user on Facebook, there is still a profile out there, a secret profile on you. So for example, let's say you're not signed up for Facebook, and you want to, somebody else is writing about you or put a picture up about you in another conversation. Well, as soon as your name pops up, a new dark profile is created on you. Then that becomes a repository for any data about you. So anybody that mentions you out in the ether, automatically that information automatically gets associated with your dark profile.
And Michael, that's what some of our listeners want to hear more about. What we're going to do now is we're going to end this, and then we're going to do another one, and we're going to call it The Dark Profile, because, folks, you are not going to believe what we're about to tell you. Trust me. Thank you.